Okay, hi.
Hi.
If you don't pay attention, we're going to take you to the Buddha ride. This is not my story. This is the story of Amalie Anthes, who lived almost a full course of the 19th century. She's an interesting person, I think, but you're never going to find her in any of the histories of Amana that you're going to read. You have to dig pretty deep to find mention of her. If you put Anthes into the Amana family tree and search for that last name, Anthes, this is what comes up. Okay, normally if you put in Haldy in that Amana family tree, you're going to get a list of people 2 pages long of Haldys. But she is the only Anthes in the entire Amana family tree. She's the only one from her family, and I'll tell you later it was a large family, that joined the community. She never married, and she never had any children. So, and all that remember her, she died in 1895, all those people who might have remembered her are also long gone. So she's easily lost in our history. But her history kind of shadows the history of our community. She really saw it all. She saw the gathering of the community in the estates in Germany, the move to Ebenezer, and then again the move to Amana and Middle Amana in Iowa. So I think her story is very interesting, and I want to share it with you, whether you like it or not. I first came across her years and years ago, 25 years ago, when I came across this document. It's a simple half-a-page document, front and back. It's a plan for a house in Middle Amana. It caught my attention because you don't see those usually. And in the back, there's a lot of information about what houses were built in Middle and when and that kind of thing. But you notice George Weber lived in this house. Johann Trautmann lived in this house. This is, in fact, there's the street. Across the street is the Middle Amana Church. This is the house that's where Ursula and Scott Williams now own. And what's interesting about it is it gives dimensions. Okay, it says that the main part is brick, the anbau is wood, and then there's a little sketch here at the bottom that has the upper floor. Okay, the second story. Here it says that the Trautmanns and the Webers are living downstairs, and upstairs in the room by the Speicher is Amalie Anthes. Okay, Amalie Anthes. And I thought, now who in the world is that? Why is she there in this house, important house? Weber and Trautmann were the main guys in Middle Amana. They were the first elders. So I thought, well, I'm going to keep my eyes open for her when I see her in the documents. And over the years, back then I didn't have the Amana family tree. I couldn't look her up. So over the years, I just kept an Anthes file. I'd find something, photocopy it, put it in the file. And this is an opportunity to dig out that file and see what I have. She first shows up in our records. Well, actually, before that even. She was born in a town just a little north of Lich. Lich is a town in Germany. There's Frankfurt. Frankfurt to Lich is about 30 miles. There's Biddingen, the Ronneberg area is right in here. Again, about 25, 30 miles. Lich. She grew up in Lich. She was born in a town just outside of Lich. She was had a very large family. We've identified at least 2 sisters and 5 brothers. But she first then appears in our history in 1838. And luckily, Christian Metz came to Lich and delivered a testimony. This is a testimony in Lich on 15 September 1838. And in the introduction to that testimony, it tells us a little bit about Amalie Anthes and why Christian Metz was even there. She's described as being just 20 years old at the time. Back up, she's prominent for one other reason, because she was born March 18, 1818.
Oh.
I mean, you got to be interested in her just because of that. I sometimes just sit at home and go, March 18, 1818. Anyway, she was 20 years old in 1838, and she's described as having a very unique and very thorough religious awakening. Now,
20.
At age 20, okay, or even before maybe. Now, it doesn't really describe exactly what that meant, but it apparently had some physical manifestations. Okay, she was maybe not eating. She was weak, and there was a doctor in Lich called his name was George Weber, and he was treating her for this illness, and had been treating her for over a year, it says. And finally, he reached the conclusion that maybe this isn't a physical ailment, maybe it's something spiritual going on. So he was friends with a Gottlieb Ackerman, who was a friend of Christian Metz. And George Weber asked Ackerman could you have Christian Metz come up here and take a look, see what you think? And Metz came up and delivered this testimony. And so in a way, and then George Weber was very struck by Metz, and he ended up joining the community then. And like I said, Weber became a very important person in the community. And so Amalia is really, in a way, indirectly responsible for George Weber coming to the Gemeinde. So eventually she did recover, and she started attending the Sunday Sammlungen in the community in Armenberg. Armenberg, if I can back up, Armenberg is just, there's Lich, Armenberg is just right down there. It's about 2 or 3 miles. It would be like a 45-hour walk for her to walk from Lich down to attend the community services in Armenberg. And she did this against the wishes of her family, very much so. In fact, her family was very prominent in Lich. Her father was a school teacher, and her brother was a Lutheran minister. So they didn't look kindly on her hanging out with these Inspirationists. But she did eventually leave her family, literally say goodbye to her parents and her brothers and sisters, and move to the community in Marienborn, which is down here by Beedingen, close to the Ronneberg. And she lived with a woman who had just lost her husband. Her husband had died, and so she had room. Her name was Regina Biema, and they remained friends throughout their life then. Regina's husband, August, had just died earlier that year. So she joined the community just at that time. In 1842 was when she finally made that move and moved to Marienborn. She joined the community just when they were starting to look to America to really get out of Germany. And in March of 1843, we have a letter, I don't have it here, we have a letter she wrote to Christian Metz. Christian Metz was already in America. And in that letter, Amalia says, really reasserts her commitment to the community, saying that she is going to follow them to America and thanks God for giving her the opportunity to do that. She's with the program all the way, definitely, and makes that commitment. And in fact, probably within a few months after she wrote that letter, she did move to America. In fact, she moved to America then later on in 1843. When she was in Ebenezer, she took on an important role. One of the interesting documents we have is a job assignment list of people in Ebenezer, of what everyone is responsible for. There's listings, there are probably 60 or 70 different listings of who's responsible for this, who's responsible for that, and it's definitely male-dominated, okay? Who's in charge. But number 47, in charge of seeing to and caring for all the bedding in the community.
Oh my.
Okay? That's Amalie Anthes. She's putting in charge, making sure everyone has a bed to sleep in, which is kind of important. You just can't overlook that. So then in 1854, this was in Middle Ebenezer where she first moved. In 1854, they had her move to Nieder Ebenezer because Brother Beyer, Johann Beyer, his wife had died, and he needed a quote house helper. Okay, so Amalie Anthes was sent to Lower Ebenezer to be Johann Beyer's house helper for a while. About a year and a half later, he apparently didn't need a house helper anymore, and she moved back to Middle Ebenezer. And then it was on to Middle Amana in 1864. It's she's kind of unique in another way in that she lived in Ebenezer for 21 years. Okay, she was one of the first to come there and one of the last to leave to go to Amana. Not many people actually lived in Ebenezer that long. At that point, when she left Ebenezer, she was in her mid-40s or low 40s. So back to this. This is the back side of that house plan. This is the reverse page. And this, it talks about, definitely scribbled up, but very valuable information. Talks about what they built, what they're planning to build. And right here, it says, when I first read this document, it says, okay, they're going to build a brick house. The upper story will be for a meeting hall, and the bottom story will have several rooms, including 2 rooms for Schwester Malchen and the sewing shop. Okay? So at the time I thought, Malchen, I never heard that name before. I looked up all the surnames, thinking it was a last name. Schwester Malchen, who could she be? And I didn't know. I just chalked it up, said, well, another unknown, another mystery. And then later on, 10 or 20 years later, I came across some letters written to Amalie, and they're all addressed, Liebe Malchen. Okay? Malchen was her nickname, her affectionate name or whatever. Everyone, it turns out, everyone called her Malchen. Amalia is probably too hard to say. I would guess. So anyway, but again, you can see there that she was in charge of the sewing shop. And in fact, all the census records for the village of Middle list her occupation as seamstress. Okay, so she was in charge of the sewing shop in Middle Amana. Now, she did, as I said, she left her family against their wishes, but she did, I don't want to say reconcile, but she did maybe reconcile, but she kept contact with her family. The museum upstairs in the archive through the Heinemans, who had lived in that house that we saw her, and the Rymans, who lived there, kept all her letters. We have over 100 letters from this person. Again, from her relatives from Germany mainly, from her brothers and sisters. They're all addressed Liebe Malchen. She has nephews and nieces that she never met, and they always say, "Oh, dear aunt, Liebe Tante." You know, she definitely kept in touch with her family, even though she left them back then. And in fact, she had a brother, Wilhelm, who lived in New York City. He apparently was a businessman. He had an office on Wall Street. He traveled back and forth to Germany and even to England. And there's evidence, though I can't say for positive, that he actually visited her in Ebenezer at least once. And we know for sure that Wilhelm Marshall, when he did business in New York, he would stop and say hello to this Wilhelm Anthes in the city. Now, one of the letters I found really intriguing. This was a letter sent by one of her brothers. It's a description and a drawing of her parents' tombstone.
Oh.
Okay, you know, they didn't have a phone you could just click and send it.
Yeah.
So the brother drew a picture and described it. It says, you know, generally it says the top is marble, the foundation is brick, and, you know, it talks about what it is. And again, it shows that this is a substantial family. You know, they can afford a monument like that. It's very telling. And so you can see that her dad died in 65, her mother died in 69. By that time, you know, she was already in middle Amana. And I just thought that was a cool little drawing. And we have a few artifacts that prove she existed. I guess is what you could say. One, here's a book. It's a Kinderstimme, a common book in Amana. It's inscribed Amalie Anthes, Middle Ebenezer, 12 April 1851. Here's a book, but it's inscribed by Louise Weber, George Weber's wife. And it says, "This book was given to me as a gift by Amalie Anthes." Okay? And there's the Schrank John was telling you about. What does it say on the back?
On the back it says Amalie Anthes shipped to Amana Society Homestead.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And you could tell she was an Amana baseball fan.
So the way that we got that is, yes, she graduated from high school in 1851, right? But the way that we got that was because the Reedy family is like, so we don't need all of our trunks and beds, and so, you know, we get a load from George every year. Other relatives will call. His daughter Anne Marie called and said, "I got a couple things for you," which she's brought several loads before to us, chairs and things like that. So she randomly brought that, and then when I was helping her out, I said, "It says something on here," and I went like this. It says Amalie Anthes. Who's that? The secret was, right, the kitchen boss, Mrs. Reedy, and her mother came from Germany in late 1860s, early 1870, whatever, but they lived in that Heinemann house in Middle with Amalie Anthes, and she died when 1895, and that is the same year that Louise Steinmiller and young, Marie Steinmiller, who became Steinmiller Reedy, moved in and took over the Reedy kitchen. So they took that with them. So.
Oh.
You got that, John? So
yeah, that's at the communal kitchen.
That's in the boys' room downstairs at the Reedy house.
Yes. Okay.
So she died in Middle Amana on 19 December 1895. My dad died in Middle Amana on 19 December also. So there's always these coincidences that happen. It's a and what's unusual is that her obituary was written by Gottlieb Scheiner, the well-known Amana historian. and it's a 5-page obituary. Okay? Most people would get a paragraph or so. But Gottlieb Scheuner wrote a 5-page obituary. He actually was in charge of the funeral, so the obituary includes details as to what song was sung, what biblical text was used, and Scheuner even went so far as to write a poem on the occasion, which I thought was kind of cool. I'd like to translate that sometime, but I can't.
So is she buried in Middle?
Yeah.
She's in the Middle Cemetery then?
Yeah, she's buried in the Middle Cemetery.
And where will you be buried, Lanny? Where will you be buried?
Right next to her.
Somewhere close.
But Scheuner gives us a little bit more information about her in that obituary. He talks about her schwach core, okay, her weak body.
Yeah.
That she had a weak body, and he remarks that it's amazing that even though she was always so weak, she lived to be 77 years old. Okay? He says that she broke a leg soon after she arrived in Middle Amana, and had to be in traction for like a month, and was in a lot of pain. But that she always said she didn't want any special treatment, that she carried on her duties in the sewing shop as long as she was possible. She broke her leg again in 1891, and in her last few years, she suffered a series of small strokes from which she mostly recovered. What finally got her was a major stroke in 1895. When Scheuner emphasizes her strong faith and her commitment to the community in all that writing. I just threw this in. This is 2 of her letters. This one on the left, it's written in 1861, and this was written in 1894, just before her death, a year before her death. Look at the handwriting difference. Okay? I mean, you could, if you didn't believe Scheuner, that she might have had a stroke or two, you could tell by her writing in those letters. I find that very, I don't know, moving.
Yeah.
But again, so we know a lot about Malcha. But in a way, she's still a woman of mystery, right, Anne?
Yes. I'm frustrated. I can't find her on a ship.
Oh, no.
No. So I don't know if they misspelled her name so badly that I can't figure it out. But I've looked and looked and gone back and looked again, and now I'm going to go back and look again.
And there's a lot of conflicting information on her. I mean, even in terms of where she lived, it's conflicting because it says she moved to Marienborn with this Regina, but the letter she wrote to Christian Metz just before she moved to America was dated in Armenburg, and she had been associated with the Armenburg community. So, and even in Middle Amana, we're not exactly sure where she lived because, in one census, for example, in 1870, she's listed twice.
Nope.
In two different houses, and neither one of those houses is that house that I was but as Anne suggested, the biggest mystery, and this is what makes history fun, really, is that there's always more questions than answers. The biggest mystery is how and when did she actually come to America? There's conflicting information there too. Some sources say she came in June of 1843, which would have made her part of that second group that came over, and it would have been on the cotton planter ship, the ship that Anne's relatives came over on.
Yeah.
But she's not listed on that ship. Okay? Gottlieb Scheuner, who I would trust more than anyone, says that she was part of the 4th group who came in October of 1843, and that would put her on the Florida, the ship called the Florida. but she's not listed on that ship either. And just to throw a little bit more mystery in there, one person that is listed on the Florida ship that's never been accounted for anywhere else in our records is a young woman, 25 years old, unmarried, going to Buffalo by the name of Johanna Gerber. Okay?
Yes.
All right?
Oh.
Yeah.
She was in the.
Wow.
So, and we don't, and she's listed right in among all the other inspirationists. Okay? We don't know anything about her, and Amalie is not listed, so I like to have a little conspiracy theory. Maybe she was traveling under an assumed name.
Her family couldn't find her.
Anthes was traveling under her alias.
Yeah. So anyway, so we know a lot about her, but we don't know where she lived or how she got here, basically. So I conclude simply by quoting Scheuner in the obituary. Although she had no natural family or relatives in the community, she had many sisters and brothers in the Lord.
Amen.
Can't ask for more than that, can you? So that's the story of Malshin, and I hope she didn't mind me telling it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Way on one of your first slides, with that writing in there, on the right-hand side was this thing that looked like a river.
Yeah, no, that was just a line to demark where he was writing in the margins there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It looked like that might have some
Yeah, no,
special
that was just a
significance.
line so you didn't read it with the rest of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Common practice.
All right. Break down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe once